My days followed a rhythm. Wake up, coffee, a peck on the cheek from my husband, then silence for the rest of the day. Our marriage wasn't dead, but it had stopped breathing on its own long ago. Conversations turned into exchanges of logistics. Glances lost their warmth. It wasn't hate. It was the comfort of two people who no longer needed each other. I was never the evil stepmother trope. I married a man with a teenage son, and did my best to blend into a role I had no training for. We got along, in the way people do when they coexist without expectation. Polite, distant, civil. He mostly stayed in his room, glued to his screen like most boys his age. Sometimes he'd mumble greetings, occasionally smile if I brought him something. I never thought about him more than I had to. That day wasn't supposed to be different. I came home earlier than expected after my yoga instructor canceled. The house was quiet as always. My husband was out of town for a conference. I set my bag down, ready to dive into my routine. That's when I heard it. Soft, rhythmic, muffled. I wouldn't have paid attention if it weren't for the odd echo. It was coming from the guest room, the one we barely used except when relatives visited or when he wanted space from his father. The door was slightly ajar. I paused, part of me annoyed, part of me curious. I pushed it open without announcing myself. And there he was. I should have turned away, screamed, done anything normal. But I didn't. For a solid 3 seconds I just froze. His back was to me, pants around his thighs, hand working at himself with such focus he didn't even notice me at first. Then he did. He spun, eyes wide, face red, yanking a pillow to cover himself. I snapped out of it and left immediately, shutting the door behind me with more force than necessary. My hands were shaking. Not from shock but something more confusing. It wasn't just the act, it was him. He wasn't a kid anymore. He had grown. Shoulders broader, voice deeper, presence heavier. I locked myself in the bathroom and stared at my reflection for 10 minutes. My mind kept replaying what I saw, not with horror but with something far worse, interest. Not that I wanted to. I wanted to feel disturbed, outraged. But my emotions weren't following the script. I was ashamed, not of what he did, but of what stirred inside me. That moment had cracked something in me. Something I'd buried under years of numb routine. It wasn't love. It wasn't lust either, at least not in any clean sense. It was the feeling of being alive again, of seeing something raw, unfiltered. I told myself it would fade, that I'd forget by tomorrow. I was wrong. It had only just begun. I tried to shake it off, convince myself it was a one-time thought brought on by shock. But that image, his startled expression, the way he scrambled to cover himself, kept playing in my head. Not in horror. In curiosity. I avoided him the next few days. Made excuses not to be in the same room. Still, I could feel him in the house, moving around with a kind of silence that only made me more aware of him. Every sound from his room triggered a response in me. I started listening for him, unintentionally. I hated it. I hated myself for it. I began noticing things I never paid attention to. The smell of his body spray that lingered after he left the bathroom. The subtle change in how he dressed. More confident, more man than boy. His voice had depth now, and his mannerisms had lost that awkwardness teenage boys carry. He didn't look at me the same way either. There was something different in his eyes, something unsure, searching. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was awareness. But it was there and I couldn't ignore it. Neither could I pretend I didn't like it. One night while doing laundry, I found a towel buried under his clothes. It was stiff and crusted. I didn't need to investigate. My stomach clenched. Not because I was disgusted, but because it pulled me deeper into that place I didn't want to go. It made things real. He was fantasizing again. The thought of who or what he was imagining took root. Was it someone online? A girl from school? Or worse, was it me? I stood in the laundry room longer than necessary, holding that towel like it held an answer. Part of me wanted to believe this was just teenage behavior, nothing more. But I couldn't lie to myself anymore. I had been thinking about him. Not as a child, not even as my husband's son, but as a man. That terrified me. It wasn't supposed to be this way. I wasn't supposed to feel this kind of heat again, not in this context. It had been so long since I'd felt anything at all. My husband's touch had become mechanical. We hadn't made love in months. He was always tired, always preoccupied. I had resigned myself to a quiet, dried-up version of womanhood. But now that old hunger had started to wake up. I didn't recognize it at first. Felt wrong, dirty. Yet it was more honest than anything I'd felt in years. And I hated how quickly it replaced the guilt. I didn't know if he was feeling the same way, but I needed to know. Not just for closure or clarity, but because part of me wanted to cross a line. Even thinking it made me sick. But the thought wouldn't go away. Kept coming back louder, bolder. I knew what I wanted, even if I didn't know what I'd do with it. So I decided to talk to him. Not to scold, not to discipline, but to understand and maybe in some twisted way to see if he was thinking about me too. I waited until the house was quiet and the distance between us had grown too tight to ignore. When I walked into his room, I didn't know what I was going to say. I had rehearsed it 100 times, something mature, responsible, adult. But when he looked up at me, wide-eyed and cautious, everything I'd prepared dissolved. I told him we needed to talk. His expression shifted instantly, panic mixed with anticipation. I sat down beside him and said it was okay, that I wasn't angry. He looked down, embarrassed, and mumbled an apology I barely heard. I told him I understood, that what he did was normal for his age. My voice stayed steady, but something under it trembled. He nodded, said he didn't mean for me to see. I told him I didn't plan to either. We both laughed, nervous and short. Then there was silence, heavy and uncertain. I was supposed to stop there. But instead, I asked if there was someone he thought about. His eyes flicked to mine and quickly away. That pause gave me my answer. He didn't respond, just sat there stiff and confused. I reached out, touched his arm gently, maybe too long. Told him I wasn't judging him. Told him it was human to feel things, to explore. My tone had softened more than it should have. He finally looked at me and said something I wasn't ready to hear. He had thought about me. Not once. Often. His words were low, barely above a whisper, but they hit harder than anything I'd expected. I froze. Not out of fear. Out of confirmation. I asked him why. He shrugged at first, then said I made him feel something no one else did. That I listened, that I saw him. That I wasn't like girls his age, giggling and shallow. I should have shut it down right there. Should have told him it was wrong. But my heart was pounding in a way it hadn't in years. I told him we couldn't do this, that he was just confused. But my hand was still on his arm, and he didn't move. Neither did I. He leaned in just enough for me to feel his breath. It was hesitant, respectful, but charged. My instincts told me to get up, walk away. But the loneliness inside me reached out and met his hunger. I didn't kiss him, not then. But I didn't stop him when he touched my cheek, when his fingers lingered longer than they should have. It was only a moment, but it changed everything. I pulled back finally, breath caught in my chest. Told him this couldn't happen, even if part of me wished it could. His eyes dropped, full of something between guilt and longing. I left without another word. My body was tense, heart racing, hands trembling. I told myself I had dodged a disaster. But in truth, the worst damage had already been done. I had let something in that I couldn't take back. And it wasn't over. I could feel that already.